Welcome to the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. We're going to explore ways to sharpen our diagnostic skills, find learning resources, and hear from experts in the automotive field.
Hey, have you ever been faced with the challenge of sourcing, installing, and programming a used control module in a vehicle? I know a lot of us have. It seems to be happening more and more often today with the volume of control modules on vehicles, the cost of some new ones, or even the availability of new control modules. In some cases, used may be the only option. So what do you do here? I strongly recommend checking out SJ Auto Solutions and Tommy Oliva. Tommy offers a cloning service for used control modules to make these things plug and play for the vehicle that you're working on. In a lot of cases, he is also able to source the control modules if you're unable to locate one for the vehicle that you're working on. But once you get connected with Tommy, he's going to offer fantastic support from start to finish to make sure that that control module is going to work in your application. He's also got tech support that he offers through his website, along with some free resources there as well on information about used control module programming. So make sure to check out SJ Auto Solutions. I can't recommend that enough. Hey, what's going on, automotive world? Welcome to another episode of the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. My name is Sean Tipping. I'll be your host once again for this week's episode. Thank you so much for joining me. Just me on the show this week, and we're going to do round 2 of why won't this effing key program to the car? If you've been listening for a while, I had the first version of this almost a year to the day, and I didn't plan that out. I was just looking because I knew I did an episode titled Why Won't This Effing Key Program? And it was November 24th, 2024. So strange, but we had a few vehicles last week that were just a huge pain in the ass to program keys to. And we do, a fair amount of key programming. It's probably somewhere between 10 to 20% of the overall volume of what we do. So it is a smaller portion compared to diagnostics and programming, but it also kind of is programming if you think about it. Just keys have their own unique challenges. Number one being the key itself, right? Just getting the right key. And I've talked about that plenty of times before, where that can be a real challenge, even if you've been doing it for a while, even if you've got some good trusted resources. There are just so many options for particular vehicles. And once you get into the European world, it gets even more challenging. So that's its own discussion, which I've covered topics before. But today we're going to be talking about pre-existing problems on a vehicle that had nothing to do with us, and we're not affecting the vehicle as far as the customer could tell until we tried to program keys in. Okay, so that's the challenge here. Is we're coming in, car worked before. Now, in one case, they had one working key. In the other case, it wasn't all keys lost. But prior to losing those keys, the vehicle started, it ran, there were no issues apparent to the customer. Now, in a specific situation with both of these vehicles, they would have recognized a problem. But again, us walking into it, and of course, we're taking the customer at their word, but hindsight, I think they were honest, saying that, yeah, there were no problems with the vehicle prior. We're very confused because we can't add keys to this vehicle. And so now we're like, okay, is it the keys themselves? Is it the tooling that we're using or the software? Is there something going on with the car? Or are we just missing something completely and we should stop doing keys? No, I don't think that's it, but it makes you feel that way sometimes. So I got 2 cars I'm going to cover today that we recently dealt with. Again, pre-existing problems on the car. They were broken. It just wasn't broken in a way that presented itself as a symptom to the customer in everyday driving with functional keys. Again, would have in specific circumstances. So Let's start out with 2017 Toyota Camry. This is a used car lot. They sold this Camry to a customer less than a month ago. They've been driving it around just fine, and then they end up getting it towed back saying, hey, it won't start. There's a security light on the dash, right? The Toyota has it kind of in the center stack there, the little immobilizer light. And I don't know if it was the customer, or I don't know if it was the driver of the vehicle or our customer that recognized that it was a security issue, but they did see this light on. So we get out there and we're doing some other keys on this stop as well for this car lot. And right away, almost immediately, I recognize what the problem is. Now you can see, obviously this customer just bought the vehicle and they blinged it out, meaning that there are sparkly, bedazzled stick-on rings and other pieces that have been put onto the dashboard and doors and center console and stuff like that. So I'm sure you've seen these. You can order a big old package off Amazon, and one of those bling rings goes right around where the blade key ignition is. So this is a turnstile blade ignition. It does have a transponder in the remote head of the key, and it goes into the ignition, and there's a short range transponder that communicates with the halo. The car recognizes that, hey, the key belongs to this vehicle, and then it allows a start. Well, and if you haven't seen this, you probably will eventually. They get these bling rings, they stick them around the ignition, right where you put the key in. Well, there's metal in this bling ring, and it interferes with the communication between the key and the halo. So we see it and we're like, oh, okay, that's it, because we've seen this before. This is a common thing. It happens, and it will disable a vehicle. And a lot of times customers don't make that connection, and understandably so. They probably don't understand how the key actually functions, or that there's a transponder in the key at all. Now, for reference on this Toyota Camry, the key that they had, they only had one, was just a transponder head key. So there was no remote built into the head of the key, although the car did come equipped, or at least the option to have a remote head key. And what I mean by that is the buttons to lock and unlock the vehicle are on the head of the key. There's still a transponder chip in there, but the one that they had for the car was just a transponder. No buttons. So anyways, mobilizer alert's on. We see the bling ring. I'm like, okay, take that off. Take it off. And immediately the key goes in, starts the vehicle. Oh, okay. Problem solved. Now, we did order a key for this vehicle with the remote head because that's what the customer requested. They're like, hey, when they called us, they said, hey, we've got a security issue. We don't know if it's the key or not. We'd like you to come out and take a look at it. But either way, the customer would like a key that has a remote on it. Again, because, the car has that option, and it's nice to have the remote rather than putting the blade in the door every time. Sure. So we already ordered this key, so they're going to be paying for it one way or another. And so we figured, okay, we'll just cut the key and then program it in. Should be easy, and we can move on. Not so easy. So we get in, we cut the key, and we attempt the programming, and it doesn't allow it to go through. And I was actually there with one of my employees. He tried several times with several different tools, and it seemed like it would work at times. So like he could actually get this thing to start and it would stay running. But then after you would take the key out that we were trying to learn, you leave it sit for a little while, you try to go start it again, and it was immobilized again. And he tried several different times, several different tools. For a 17 Camry, there's lots of different tools that you can use to program a key, to add a key. It's relatively straightforward. Now, I should note there is a separate process for the immobilizer portion of the key and the remote portion of the key, but again, multiple tools. Autel, Top-Don, X-Tool, those are our most common ones. Any of those should be able to do it. There's more out there. All keys lost is a little different, but just for adding a key, especially when you have a master key. And I should note that that's an important thing on a Toyota if you're going to be adding keys in or programming keys, is to have or to know if you have a master key. If you don't, there's some other processes that need to be done in order to add a key. You can usually tell this by watching the security indicator and putting the key that you have into the ignition, turning it on. If the immobilizer light never lights up with a functional key, it generally is going to mean that that's a master key. You can also go into the data PIDs and see if the key that is in the ignition is a master key or a sub key. This one is a master key. And again, you can watch the immobilizer light. The immobilizer light is really important on this era of Toyotas and many others for programming keys. You kind of watch that and you can tell if the programming of the key is successful, if it likes the key that you're putting in, if it's a master or sub key. If you understand what the LED does for the security indicator, you can tell a lot just from that. So anyways, the key that we have, the functional one, the one without a remote, that is a master key, meaning that we should easily be able to add another key into this in under 5 minutes with a scan tool. But we do not seem to be able to do that. Now, I got involved because I was working on some other cars, so we shifted, and I try the same tools. I get the same result. It seems like the key programs at times, but depending on the tool you get, you either get an error or a successful completed, but it didn't matter. Either way, the key that we were trying to add, immediately after trying to program it, it would start and run the vehicle. And if you left it running, it would run all day long, no problem. But as soon as you shut it off, and you did have to give it a period of time here, I think it was until the module fully went to sleep. But then if you went to put it back in, it would not work. It would be immobilized. You could watch the immobilizer light, that it would blink at you consistently as long as that one was in there. And in addition to that, we tried doing the remote portion just to see, like, does it like the remote for this key? And it would react to the remote being programmed, but none of the buttons would work. So when I mean react, when you go through the remote programming for this Toyota, you hear the car beep as a response. I think it comes from under the hood or something like that, but you hear it beep, and that would be the normal beep that you would hear if you were like locking the vehicle. And that's a response to say, hey, I see that remote, it's programmed in, cool. But even after you did that and you'd hit the buttons, nothing would happen. It wasn't reacting. So we do a little bit of digging to make sure that we have the correct key for the car. And you can do this various ways. Again, we do a lot of keys. We have some good resources that we'll use to verify, okay, this is the correct key. Obviously, for the remote portion, we want the FCC ID to be correct. But again, that seems like it's programming in, even though it's not reacting to any of the buttons once it is. But even besides that, the immobilizer portion of the key is separate from the remote. It's two different things. So even if I've had it on Toyotas, even if the remote's wrong, you can still get the immobilizer portion programmed in, and I don't seem to be able to do this. I use the Key Tool Max, and I read the chip in the one that functions, and I read the chip in the one I have. They're the exact same type of chip, which is what we're shooting for. If they're different, okay, that might explain why this is an issue. I don't quite understand why it will run it first, but then afterwards it's not. So I'm looking a little closer at the system, looking for codes. Obviously, I didn't see any codes besides the fact that if once it was in the state where it is immobilized, it would set a code for, I think it was unregistered transponder or something to that effect. Basically, it didn't like the key. Hey, you're trying to start me with a key that is not programmed to me. I'm like, that's definitely strange. Now, something that has been very useful to me with immobilizer systems, I mentioned it before, is if you have an Autel IM series tool, you can go into the immobilizer side and you can do the immobilizer system scan. And especially on something, if you're not familiar with what components are involved with the immobilizer on a particular vehicle, but even if you are, if you just want a really good system overview, that immobilizer status screen is really helpful. It'll tell you a lot, and it breaks it down of like how many keys are programmed, master key, sub key, all that stuff on a Toyota. Now, disclaimer for Autel, if you're going to go out and buy an IM series, they did take away some Toyota and Ford key functions, and there probably will be more in the future. So be aware of that before you drop the money. But at this time of November 2025, they're still able to add keys to Toyotas. They can't do the all keys lost function, but the immobilizer system scan still works. At least on the 17 Camry it did, and it broke it down. Now, here's where this was a little bit useful to me is after I would program or attempt to program this key, the number there would stay at 1. It never went to 2, even when I was running the car with the key I was attempting to program. I was like, well, that's very strange. So then I did a little bit more work going into the actual immobilizer module on the diagnosis side of the tool and looking at the data PIDs as I'm putting different keys in there to see what it's viewing the key that I have in the ignition as. Now, if I put the functional key in the ignition, I look at the data PIDs, and you're looking at, I think it breaks it down into master key and then sub key. It'll say registered key when I put the original one in. It says master key. Now, I take that key out and I go to put the new key in just to see what it says. And this is at a point where it wouldn't start. But I watch the data PID and it never changes from registered key, even when I put the other one in. And if I'm quick enough about it, I can start and run the vehicle that way, right? So it's like it sees the first key, it holds onto that data, and it will allow me to start the car if I do it quick enough. Now, if I wait long enough with the functional key out, it eventually goes to no key. And then if I put the new key in, it will say unregistered key. It doesn't like it. It's something about the timing, and I think, well, that's very strange. And this is about the time that I kind of start putting the pieces together here. Is I have the door open on this vehicle. And of course, when I have the key in the ignition, it's dinging at me. When I take the key out of the ignition, it's still dinging at me, like I still have the key in the ignition. And I'll be totally honest, I hear dings from cars all day long that my brain pretty much tunes those out most of the time. I mean, if you program vehicles, if you do it mobile, quite often you're sitting there with the door open. And there's some vehicles that are much louder than others, and I'll flip a door latch here or there, but then I forget that the door latch is flipped and then I close the door on it. So I try to avoid that. Anyways, I was just kind of tuning the dinging out. But this show is brought to you by Auto Rescue Tools and Isaac Rodell. If you've been looking for a programming laptop, but you're not sure which one to buy or how to set it up, especially if you want to program multiple brands. You know, you've got some domestic vehicles, you've got European vehicles. Can the same software go on the same laptop? What size hard drive do I need? All those questions. Isaac's your guy. He can custom set up programming laptops that are ready to tackle any make or model. I got one of these laptops myself, and I can say that it is outstanding, and it really streamlines the process by having everything you need in one device. So if you're looking for something like that, I highly recommend checking out autorescuetools.com. You'll also find scan tools, diagnostic equipment, key cutting equipment, and much more. Check out the link in the show notes. I highly recommend it. On this Toyota, if I don't have the headlights on and I take the key out of the ignition, it should stop dinging, because that's a warning that, hey, you left your key in your ignition. Don't, lock your doors. This never changed, meaning that, at least what I'm thinking, is that it's thinking that the key is always in the ignition, that master key never left the ignition. And so I find that data PID in the immobilizer module. I see that the key in switch never changes states. Doesn't matter if I have a key in, out, doesn't matter how long I wait. But here's the interesting thing. I can put the master key that functions in, it says registered key. I can take it out, still says registered key, and it'll hold on to it for about 15 or 20 seconds, and then it will go. So there must be a periodic check to that key that only happens every once in a while. I don't know if it's a module timeout thing. Eventually it lets go. But if you swap in the new key, which is cut, and it'll turn the ignition, it's like, okay, yeah, I already saw a master key, and it'll allow start. Now, a couple ignition cycles or time, and then you're not able to anymore. But that's why when I was trying to program it, and it seemed like it was going, it really wasn't. It was just using the data from the original key, and I'm still starting it. And that's why the tool would say failure to program. And actually, one of the tools that I was using, I think it was the Topdon Phoenix Smart, gave me a different message when I was attempting to program. And it would say, this key is already registered to the vehicle. And I was like, okay, well, it must see that this one's programmed, and it's just like, okay, it's already programmed. But I did mention the number of program keys never changed from 1. And what it was saying is like, hey, you're trying to register the already registered master key. It's already programmed. And so it was never seeing the new key that I was trying to program into it because it never saw the key come out. And if you're familiar with Toyota programming, the steps on this are very clear that you have to turn the ignition off and take the key out in order to advance in the programming sequence. And this never happened. So the reason is that key in switch. Now, I've dealt with this before on vehicles. I had a Hyundai that we're trying to program in a remote. And the remote programming actually happens when the key is out of the ignition. Well, that switch, because this was a stolen vehicle and they kind of hacked apart the steering column, they didn't install the switch correctly. And so it always thought the key was in the ignition. So it would not let you program the remote in. So we had to fix that switch in order to program in the remote. It was the same thing on this Toyota. So at this point, I ended up taking apart the shell on the column, and I looked in there and I see that there are two wires that are twisted together and there's no key in switch. It's gone. It's not there. And so somebody at some point took it out. I don't know why, maybe damaged, whatever, but I separate those wires and the dinging stops. And so then I was able to just manually touch and release those wires as I was moving keys in and out, programs the new key. It's fine. Now I mentioned the remote portion. As soon as I separate those wires, the buttons on the key respond as well. That car is designed so that if the key is in the ignition, it's not going to respond to the buttons that you're pressing on the remote. So all of it made sense at that point, and I summarized that in 20 minutes for you. It was closer to an hour and a half that we spent on that car trying to add a key into it. So in real world, we dumped quite a bit of time to figure that out. Now, it is information that I really want to take with me and be conscious of, because I didn't think of to listen for the dinging on that door, to look at that data PID, but boy, it's something that's going to be part of our process now, is to make sure that that like key in switch actually functions on a car before we attempt to do any sort of programming, because obviously that's an important input in the key process. Now, the customer never noticed an issue. Bling ring aside, that was the first issue that was resolved on this one. But prior to that, the car start and ran fine because they just had a blade key with no buttons. So they didn't know the remote functions weren't going to work. And the car start and ran with the key that they had. They just wouldn't have been able to add another key like we were trying to do, right? That problem, I mean, I guess it would ding at you anytime the door is open, even if the key's out. Again, maybe you just don't notice that. You just think, oh, the car dings at me when the door is open. But otherwise, you may not never notice that there's a problem with it as a driver of the car if the keys are already programmed in. But when you go to program them, now we're presented with this issue that we have to get past. So anyways, that's first car. Second car, 2018 Chevy Malibu. This one was also a giant pain in the ass. Now, this one was an all keys lost. Lost other keys, car function prior to that, no other history on the vehicle. Like, they've owned the vehicle, they were driving it, keys worked, all functions. And again, we're taking them at their word, but afterwards, I believe that it was the truth. That's what was going on with this one. It's a push button start system. There's a key slot in the center console. There's a little pocket at the back of the cubby there in the center console. And this GM programming, very simple. We've done tons and tons and tons of these. The leashy picking the door is the hardest part of getting the cuts out of the door. Doing the remote, 12 minutes, you're in and out, easy peasy. Well, this one was not so easy peasy. Sent my employee out to attempt it first. Wasn't able to do it. Okay, well, let me run out there. I'll see what I can do. Some different various tools. I spend a bunch of time on this thing. Can't get this to go. It is blocking me when I attempt to program these keys. And I even tried with TLC, which actually works pretty well for key programming. You don't need VSP or anything like that for General Motors. And I've had a few of them where, I don't know, the Autel or the aftermarket tools just, give me hassle in trying to do an all keys lost, but GM's program will work just fine. But TLC did not work with this application either. Still fought me. And it was at the point where I was trying to register the keys when they were supposed to be placed into that pocket. And you go through a learn procedure where it cycles the ignition on and off and you're pressing the button. But basically at the point where it was supposed to learn the key in that short range transponder pocket, it would just error out, so the key can't be learned. Okay, so back to the same thing. Are these the correct keys? We do our research, make sure, yes, these are definitely the correct keys. I even tried making an Autel Universal smart key, just as like, let's try this, because I've had Autel Universals bail me out of some weird key issues before. Wouldn't let me, still failed, same thing. Okay, so again, that question mark of is my key correct is always on my mind, especially with aftermarket keys, right? Because there are cars out there where we've just had to pony up the money and get the OEM key. The aftermarkets won't work. That's, again, its own pain in the ass. But from everything we can see here, these are the correct keys for this vehicle. And I've not had this type of problem using the keys that we get from our supplier on General Motors vehicles. So I'm going to do a little bit of digging on this one, just to see like what else is going on with the vehicle. And my assumption was there was more going on and we just weren't being told the truth. Again, hindsight, I don't think that's the case. I mean, there is something broken on this vehicle, but again, same thing. Customer probably had no clue that this thing was broken. And it would have been a certain circumstance for them to be able to recognize a problem. No bling rings on this one, but it's a push button start anyway, so you could put one on there. You'd probably be fine. Anyways, no codes in the vehicle. Besides the fact that we were able to race the keys, I think the BCM was in learn mode. That was the code that we did have in there, but nothing else pointing to an issue on the car. So I'm going through the process and I'm kind of watching. And one of the things that I did was I used my Key Tool Max, and you could use other tools for this as well. There's several different tools. You can buy a little ring that has an LED on it. You can use the Autel KM100. There's a handful of other tools that will detect an ignition coil signal. So this could be for a blade style key, or it could be for the pocket for a smart key. And you hold whatever tool you're using up to this pocket where the key is in close proximity, and you attempt to activate it, whatever that is. Press the start button, try to learn the key, turn the ignition. That should trigger the vehicle to make that connection with the key, with the short range transponder there, and the key ring or the halo, whatever you want to call it. This one, it was not. Okay, so I could sit there and I could push the start button. I had no activity there. I could attempt to learn the keys. And when it got to the point where it's supposed to be taking the information from that transponder, it's not doing anything. Okay, so I took off the back of the center console so that I could access this component. And I see the little ring that is on the back side of that pocket, right? It's plastic, so you can't see it from within the center console, but on the back side, you can see there's a little ring that's snapped on there. And it goes to a tiny control module that's only a couple inches, that's bolted to the back of that center console assembly. It's got two wires going to the coil itself, and then it has a 3-wire plug, which goes to the body control module. Now, this little module is called the immobilizer control module on this vehicle. And really, its only purpose is to run that key ring, the halo, and get information from the key in that pocket, and then send that information to the body control module on a LIN bus. So it's got 3 wires, power, ground, and LIN. Very, very simple system, right? Now, it does not seem to be doing anything. Again, when I press the button on the dash, when I try to program the keys, nothing's happening. I don't see anything. So let's check the circuits to it. So I have ground. Awesome. That's what I'm looking for. I have a LIN bus, which stays high most of the time, but I can get it to pull down low, like if I'm cycling the ignition or pressing the button. I see activity on this LIN bus, and it does seem to be coming from the BCM. That there's data being transmitted on there. It's a high voltage, gets pulled down low when communication is happening, and it is only between this immobilizer control module and the BCM. The wiring diagram is very simple, just 3 circuits right to the BCM. Or I shouldn't say right to the BCM, there's connectors in between, but it goes to the BCM, it's not connected to any other modules. Okay, LIN bus seems to be there. There's a power wire as well. I have no voltage on this. Okay, so maybe this is my problem. Why don't I have voltage on this wire? Obviously the control module needs to be powered up, whatever, to operate, and I have nothing there. Okay. So I go to the body control module, which is really simple in this one. You pull the carpet down on the passenger side of the center console area, and the BCM's right there. This is the third connector over from the left, and it is the first 3 pins on the connector. So really simple to find. All 3 that go to this immobilizer control module are next to each other on the connector on the BCM. Again, power, ground, and LIN. And on the factory diagram, it shows you that the BCM supplies 12 volts to this immobilizer control module. Shows you right there, clear, plain and simple. Look the diagram up for yourself. If you look up the symbol on there, it is straight 12 volts from the BCM to this immobilizer control module. Okay, I don't have that. There's no voltage there. Okay, well here, that's my problem. And I tried hitting the button and all that stuff, and no 12 volts on this wire. I'm like, okay, well, this is what's going on. So why is the BCM not providing 12 volts on this circuit? Okay, so obviously check all the powers and grounds of the BCM. Step 1, real easy to do on this one, actually. Just go down the row and you can find all the powers and grounds. They're all there. They all light a headlight bulb, pull the proper amount of amperage. Okay, that's cool. Let's unplug this connector from the BCM and do a couple of things. Number 1, I want to see if this BCM can provide 12 volts with this circuit disconnected, right? Maybe there's something on the circuit that is pulling it down to ground. And when it's unplugged, I check that circuit for a connection to ground, and I don't have it. It's OL to ground. Okay, that's what we would want to see. And I also check the continuity from that circuit to the immobilizer module. Easy to do. I've got continuity from end to end. That's what I want to see on that wire. Again, no 12 volts out of it. I don't have a pathway to ground on that module or on that circuit. And so I test the circuit right out of the BCM. So I only have one connector unplugged. And you do want to be careful here if you're doing something like this, because what else is on that connector? But I just wanted to see, am I getting anything on that circuit with this disconnected? And what I saw on there was 2 volts when I would check that circuit. I'm going right to the pin on the BCM with this connector unplugged. I'm only getting 2 volts there. I'm like, okay, well, that's an issue. And then if I plug the connector in, it drops down to 0. And I look at the diagram and I see again, okay, 12 volts. You can look at the service information for the description of this module, and it says it provides 12 volts to this circuit. All data says the immobilizer module also receives B+ and ground from the BCM. That's straight from the system description and operation. So again, everything I'm seeing there, I'm like, okay, well, this seems like something's going on with this BCM. It's not providing 12 volts on this circuit. Now, the one thing I could have done is tried to jump 12 volts to this to see if I could learn the keys in. I didn't do that at this point. I'm like, okay, well, something's up with this BCM. Let's get a BCM for it. We had already spent a lot more time on this car than I was looking for. So I was like, let's get a BCM for it and we'll move on with our lives. So we get the BCM, new BCM from GM, put it in there, and we get the exact same thing. Can't program the keys in. We can do all the other BCM programming, but we are unable to add the keys in. It fails at the same point, does not activate the coil in the same way, and when we check the circuit, it ends up being the same thing. And again, I unplug it, I get 2 volts on that circuit, and when plugged in, it goes down to 0, and I'm like, oh, are you kidding me? Like, what's going on here? So this is where I messed up here. I did not do a thorough enough check. I didn't think about this enough. There was another check, and there's something about the circuit that I didn't know, and now I do, and now you will. You can find this in service information, but I don't know how I would have if I didn't know what I was looking for. But anyways, here's the deal about this circuit, and it says, the only place I found this was in a DTC description, basically the flow chart for diagnosing the security data circuit. So that's the circuit between the BCM and the immobilizer control module. And on number 4, where it's having you check for voltage on the power wire, It says, note, in some instances, the K9 body control module may only apply voltage for 3 seconds immediately after the ignition is turned on. It may be necessary to monitor the multimeter while turning the ignition on to observe the voltage. Okay. Now, number one, I couldn't turn the ignition on normally with this one because we didn't have any keys programmed. I could force it with the programming mode, but I didn't do that while I was doing my checks. And so apparently 2 volts on this circuit in a rested state is completely normal. It will power up the circuit, again, key on, and I think what it will do, the other thing it will do is if you're actually up there pressing the button and it's triggering the module to look for a key, it will power up that immobilizer module. At least that's the case on this 18 Malibu, because it doesn't send power back to this thing until it needs to operate it and check for a key. Otherwise, it is just a 2 volt bias, if you will. I don't know the purpose of the 2 volts there, but that's all that's there, and that's normal, and that's how this one operates. Now, going back to it being plugged in, it drops down to 0. I'm like, that's interesting that drops down to 0 after completing this diagnosis. That should be at 2 volts as well. It shouldn't get pulled down to 0. What it ended up being, and what I did not check on my first trip, is that wire was shorted to ground, but it was only shorted to ground when the connector was plugged into the BCM. If you remember before, I had unplugged the connector, I had tested for a short to ground. It was not there, but plugged in it was. And here's why. The short to ground was actually on the ground wire for the immobilizer control module, right? So the BCM supplies a ground to the immobilizer control module through another pin that's right next to it, and that wire was shorted to the power wire. Okay. Now, where this was on a connector under the center console that a bunch of pop had been spilled on at some point. And after I looked at the diagram, I'm like, okay, let me access this connector. I pull off the center console plastic. I see this connector. It's all full of pop. Pull it apart, clean it up. Now that short between the power and the ground wire go away. But again, I never checked for that the first time I was looking at it. I missed that one for sure, 100%. But with the second look, I was like, oh, okay. After I clean that up, guess what? That wire stays at 2 volts until, again, you go to program keys, hit the button, get that coil to activate somehow, and then the BCM will power up the circuit, and it will trigger the coil to read the key, and the keys went right through. So on this one, again, the customer probably had spilled pop, it looked like, quite a while ago on the center console and into this connector. And maybe other circuits would have been affected. Again, I didn't have any codes that I saw that were relevant. But this wouldn't have been a problem to them unless the key battery was dead and they tried to put it in the pocket. It wouldn't have worked. They wouldn't have been able to start the car that way. But before they lost their keys, that wasn't an issue. Their keys were programmed. They worked in a proximity mode. It was using low frequency antennas, and everything was good. But when we went to do the all keys lost, that coil portion didn't work because that power and ground to the immobilizer control module shorted together with pop in, I think it was connector 300 right underneath that center console there. So that's a common place. If people are spilling stuff, it's going to get soaked with whatever they're spilling on it. So anyways, those were 2 rather frustrating vehicles. Obviously on the Malibu, made a bad call before we got it figured out. But I thought it would be worthwhile sharing. And if you're doing keys at all, I'm sure you understand how much of a pain it can be sometimes. If you're looking on getting into keys, just understand when keys go smooth, it's really good. It's like printing money. But when keys do not go smooth, man, it can be real pain because there's a lot of variables, including broken things on the car that weren't even apparent to the customer prior to you trying to add a key. So hopefully you found something interesting, learned something out of that. But other than that, thank everybody for listening. Always appreciate it. Let's get out there, start fixing the world one car at a time.
Yeah.